hello everyone. Welcome to today's event on how to control your thoughts and stress levels in everyday life, which I'm sure we all can agree affects each and every one of us. So thank you so much for taking the time out of your day to be here. The event today is brought to you by the mental health company MindUp. I'm Casey Barrow and I work within the partnerships team at the company. And it's our mission to stop the one-size-fits-all approach to mental health so that we can all live in a world where no one ever feels stuck, hopeless, or alone. So today's session is hosted by the wonderful Nikki, as you can see here, who is a MHFA England registered mindset and career coach. Now, Nikki is fantastic, and after spending 15 years in the corporate world working at places such as PwC and Deloitte, Nikki turned her attention to solutions-focused coaching and has been working with MindUp actually from the very start, supporting hundreds of people in the process. So the event will run for 30 minutes with a 15-minute Q&A at the end. Please feel free to ask any questions in the chat box at any time. It'll be fantastic to hear your thoughts, and we'll pick this up at the end of the session. Now, I'm delighted to hand over to Nikki for the rest of the presentation.
Thanks very much, Casey. And I just got over my own stress here. I was saying to Casey before, I wondered if it was because I was nervous, I was feeling really hot. But then I realized my thermostat was actually at 29 degrees. So I've rectified that situation. I've cooled down a bit and we're ready to go. So I'm just going to share my screen and we're going to get cracking. So hopefully you can all see that screen. Casey, can you just give me a yes? Let me know that we're on.
Yes, all good, Nikki, all good.
Fabulous. So thank you, Casey, for that introduction. As you said, I'm one of the coaches here at MindUp and proudly supporting MindUp's ethos that there is no one size fits all to mental health. And today I'm here to talk to you specifically about how to control your thoughts and stress levels in everyday life. And I hope to be able to give you some practical ideas that you can take away and use. So a little bit about me. Casey's just given me a lovely introduction. My background is in financial services. I started off my career in PwC a long time ago, and I used to work with really big international organizations in a tax advisory capacity. And the reason that I tell you that story is that I've experienced what it feels like to work in fast-paced, high-achieving environments, serving clients. I know about the rewards that come with that, and I also know about the stresses that come with it. And about 5 years ago, I jumped out of that space and became a coach. But it didn't really start there because 10 years before that, I got really interested in psychology on an internal secondment that I was on. So as well as there being times I absolutely loved my job, there were also times that I felt like there was something else calling me. And so I embarked on my career change, which is sometimes what I talk to people about doing. So as well as working as a coach, I work as a speaker, a facilitator, and a consultant for corporate business. I use a variety of modalities, including mindfulness, resilience, and positive psychology. And that's going to be infused in what we're talking about today. When I work one-to-one with clients, I'm helping you gain clarity on where you're going. I'm helping you to unpick your thinking and to gain a new perspective on things so that you can move forward and feel more fulfilled. And I also can just act as a thinking partner because sometimes we have a lot of stuff going on up here, and it is very beneficial to speak it out loud. And it's not quite the same if you do that in front of a mirror. So today I'm going to break down the content in 3 parts. We're going to be talking about 1, your return to the office, because there's a lot of mixed emotions about that, some excitement, some worries. Then we're going to talk about the physiology, a little bit of stress and how your thoughts affect your body. And then lastly, we're going to talk about how you can build your resilience to help you navigate your stress levels. So a little bit of housekeeping before we get going. I invite all of you to approach this with a beginner's mind. And why I say that is that we live in an age of information. You can probably find anything that I'm about to tell you today on the World Wide Web. So you could go out there and do that. Equally, some of the things you might already know. And if you do know, then I just invite you to be curious about, okay, if I know this, am I really embodying it at the moment? Or perhaps it inspires you to think about things in a different way, or to research something and do something else positive to help you and in your situation. We're going to spend 30 minutes talking, or I'm going to talk, and then 15 minutes at the end for Q&A. So when we think about well-being, I like to think about this little pyramid sort of diagram, because just like MindUp has its ethos that there's no one size fits all to mental health, well-being is so much more than the absence of illness. Kind of popularly, we might think about the physiological and psychological effects, and there's the very obvious things like a good diet, getting enough sleep, getting enough exercise, but it's far more nuanced than that. And each one of you will have your own approach to exercise and your own approach to using tools that help you psychologically. As well as that, well-being is about overall life satisfaction. So things like our financial well-being and our social well-being also impact the way that we feel about everything overall. And I think this sort of social point really plays into some of the things that we're going to talk about today. So going back to the office, I guess what I really want to impress on everyone here is that if you're feeling worried, but if one of your colleagues is really excited, all of those emotions are completely normal. Whatever you feel is completely normal. None of us have ever lived through a global pandemic before, so we're all learning as we go. And in addition to that, over this last 2 years, our lives have become very, very insular. So we've been used to working at home, and it's hard to think, but 2 years ago, I was helping people to get their mindset around working at home. But now we've kind of formed habits around that situation, can feel really uncomfortable to step out of that. And approaching things with an optimistic outlook is scientifically proven to really help. And that's not to say, by the way, that optimism and pessimism are good and bad, because it's far more nuanced than that. And actually critical thinking might be a key part of your role. But actually being aware of the thoughts that we have about a situation, and we're going to go on to talk about how that affects our body, is really going to affect how you approach going back to work. And self-talk is really key here. And by self-talk, I literally mean the kind of things that we say to ourselves. And a little divergence, but it's related, a story about rabbits. So in the 70s, there was a group of scientists doing some experiments on rabbits, and they wanted to find out whether there was a connection between diet and heart health. So they took 2 groups of rabbits, maybe they were white fluffy ones, I'm sure they were very cute, and they fed both groups exactly the same high-fat diets. And they expected them to have the same health markers when they'd finished the research. But one group of rabbits had significantly better health outcomes. They had lower cholesterol, and overall, all markers were just better. And this was really curious because they'd been fed the same thing. It wasn't expected. So we discovered that the healthier rabbits, the person responsible for looking after them, had actually been talking to them, had been taking them out of their enclosure and petting them, and so generally had just been kind. So the science backs this up now, that kindness and community are so, so important for our health and well-being. And not only that, but actually community with lots of different people, not just people who are the same as you. And when you think about kindness, I wonder how kind you are to yourself. What are the kind of things you say towards yourself to motivate yourself? Are they kind? Are they loving and supportive? Or are they sometimes a little bit critical? Maybe you might go, oh, you idiot, or why did you do that? So we are inclined to be really critical to ourselves in order to motivate ourselves, because we think that that's a good way to make us like get going and do a good job. But actually the science shows us something different. So if you're mean to yourself or talk unkindly to yourself, that releases adrenaline and cortisol, stress hormones in your body. Now, those aren't always bad. Again, there's no extremes here, but low levels of stress consistently are bad for your well-being. But when you flip that and think about kindness and compassion, talking to yourself kindly actually releases opiates and dopamine in your system. And you may be familiar with those as the love hormones. So when we are feeling good about ourselves, that is when we're primed to be our best. And so one of the questions that I'd like you to take away to you with yourself today is to just ask yourself, how can I be kind to myself like no one else can? Because if you're not kind to yourself, why would you expect anybody else to talk kindly to you? And Kristin Neff is one of the leading researchers in the field of self-compassion. So if you type her name into Google, you'll find lots of resources and her talking about exactly this and the importance of self-compassion. So talking kindly to yourself, and that obviously implies to the situation in going back to work. So there's no need to berate yourself for feeling badly, but it's, saying it's okay. This is going to be a challenge, but you know that you can get through this if you have the right support available to you. So next, I'd like to do a little visualization with you. So I'd like you to close your eyes. It's only going to be for max 30 seconds. And I'd like you to imagine that lemon in your mind's eye. And then you're going to go over to a counter and cut that lemon in half, squeeze the lemon juice into a glass, and then lift up the glass and take a really big glug. So that citrusy, zesty taste washing around your mouth, rolling over your taste buds before you swallow. And I wonder what's just happened for you. What happened in your body when you ran through that exercise? You see, it's almost impossible that your body doesn't produce saliva in your mouth when you do that. Because in anticipation of drinking the lemon juice, your body is saying, hey, I need to protect the enamel of my teeth, so I'm going to produce saliva in my mouth to do that. And the reason that this is really important is the mind-body connection really, really is a thing. And all of the science now is more supportive of that, whereas in the past, maybe people didn't believe it quite as much. But your mind is so powerful. Your thoughts are so powerful. And when I say thoughts, this might seem absolutely crazy, or you might already know it. But the statistics say that you have between anything 60,000 and 100,000 thoughts a day, which is just staggering, isn't it? And the way that your body processes this information is that a lot of those thoughts are processed by your unconscious or your subconscious. So you learn how to approach things, you form beliefs throughout the way that you've grown up from observing other people, and then things are automatically processed in your brain, which is amazing, right? And one of the things that coaching does is it can bring awareness to maybe beliefs that aren't supporting you anymore. But what we're really here to talk about is the fact that because you have so many thoughts a day, thoughts are not facts. There's an analogy used that thoughts are just like clouds passing in the sky. So you don't have to believe any thought just because you have it and it's a thought. It's just a thought in your head. And the other analogy that I like to use that my clients find quite helpful is the fact that is this analogy about London buses. So you'll see lots of these going by, but you don't need to get on board every bus. So if that bus has a destination which says going back to work is going to be terrible, our thoughts affect the way that we feel, and that affects the way that we behave. So if we think like that, then we might not feel good about going back to work. We might behave in a way that's not supportive to the rest of our team. But if we reverse engineer it and think, well, actually, how would I like to behave? So I'd like to be a great team member. I'd like to, show up for everybody. How do I need to feel? I need to feel good. I need to feel safe. What's the thought I need to have? Well, the thought might be something like a bridging thought, like, yes, this is going to be challenging, but I know that I have tools and I'm equipped to help me get to that place. So always think about that destination of where that bus is going. And the same can apply to, if a presentation doesn't go well, or you're nervous about a presentation. If you think this is going to be terrible, then it might just turn out terrible, because the things that you do to support yourself might not be supportive enough. So what I suggest that you do, or a suggestion, it's up to you whether you do it, is get curious about your thoughts. And what kind of thoughts are sort of around? Like, are there certain maybe critical thoughts that replay? Is there a pattern there? You can maybe write them down if there's a common theme. Because the biggest step with any of this work and any personal development is awareness. Because once you're aware of something, you can change it. If it's unconscious, if you don't know about it, you don't know. That's the reason it's unconscious. So being aware is such a huge step. And I am always telling people that, even when they start something and they feel frustrated, I've got another analogy for that, surprise, surprise. And that is, if you imagine a wood that's really densely overgrown, or a forest, and you need to get from one side to the other, it's really overgrown and quite prickly. The first time you go through that wood, it's going to be really uncomfortable. It's not going to be fun. You're probably not going to enjoy it. You might. But if you travel down that path, the same path every day, it becomes more hard trodden. And the wiring in your brain is exactly the same. So you might have heard of the sentence, neurons that fire together, wire together. And it's exactly that, because when you've done something often enough, it becomes habit, your unconscious just does it. So you can be with the fact that things are uncomfortable, and that doesn't mean that you're not creating change or affecting things. Staying present with mindfulness is a big thing. And when I say mindfulness, sometimes people get carried away and think about carried away is the wrong word, but think about like a formal meditation practice. But mindfulness is anything that utilizes your senses. So you can do that on a walk, listening out for the birds. You can feel your feet in connection with the floor. You can eat mindfully. So you're not watching the TV while you eat, and you're really focused on the taste, the texture of everything that's going on. Because when you do that, it takes you out of the anxiety about the future and the worry about the past, because you're just in the present. And things around us can really trigger that stress response in our body. So I've shown you with the lemon exercise, and you may relate to having once been in the shower in the morning on the way to work, and you start thinking about a client meeting that you've got, or something that you've got to do, and before you know it, that anxiety's brewed up in your stomach and you feel tense and on edge. And that is because your stress response has been ignited by your thoughts. So we can build boundaries about what we choose to think about. And the other big thing here is this thing. Because if you wake up in the morning and the first thing that you do is look at your phone, that can send you into a spiral of stress. It might not for you, but even seeing notifications pop up on your phone, that immediately takes you into somebody else's world, somebody else's needs, without making sure that you've got what you needed in the morning to ground yourself and resource yourself. And one other thing here is, perhaps the addiction that a lot of us have formed over the past couple of years with what is going on the world stage. And that can also trigger your stress response system. And you could avoid watching the news. That's the extreme of things. You'll still probably hear about things from other people. But if that's not for you, you could think about turning off the news notifications on your phone. Or you could just read the headlines if you want to keep informed, because we don't always need to read the story behind the headline, especially if that story is really triggering our stress response, and then there's nothing we can do about it. We want you to be able to do something positive with that energy rather than just feel paralyzed with that stress. So being kind to yourself, and this just reinforces what I've been talking about, is that when things are new, they can feel challenging, and that's okay. And switching to the word challenging instead of hard makes it easier for our brain to do that thing. It's a really simple step, but it kind of opens our mind more to the possibility of change. So the last section here is on building resilience. And to be honest with you, I could have spent an hour talking about each of these topics because there is so much to talk about. But I wanted to give you a little sprinkling of everything so that you could have a various different kind of approaches to use. And the good news here is you all have inner resilience. It's not that you were either born resilient or you weren't. It's also something that we can build. It's like a muscle. Like, I don't have much here, but you can build it by, like you would build a muscle by going to the gym. And that is by the experiences that we have, so that when you come to approach something and it feels quite challenging, you can say, okay, here's me facing this. What has helped me in the past here? Because then your brain automatically goes to look for that thing, and it knows, it goes, hey Nikki, like, you know that you really need to like go swimming or do exercise, because that's something that makes you feel grounded. And to think about what those things are for you, the Resilience Practitioner course that I was taught by Dr. Chris Johnson, who used to be a GP, and I would recommend his book, which you can buy on Amazon, is this water level and boat metaphor. So if you think about a boat on the water, and the water represents your resilience and well-being level. Underneath the surface of the water, there are going to be some obstacles. There might be some rocks, there might be some sandbanks, there might be all sorts of things under there. So when your water, the resilience level, is higher, it's easier to float over those things. It doesn't mean that they're not going to be there, but it makes it easier to deal with those challenges. But if there's downward pressure exerted on that water level and resilience, then that lowers down, then we're more likely to perhaps crash into a rock or get grounded onto a sandbank. And so you can do a really simple exercise here where you draw a line and you can think about what are the upward things and what are the downward exertional forces. The very simple ones are obviously exercise, sleep, and diet. And like I said at the beginning, there's all sorts of nuances to that as well, but it's important to think about what you need and what's good for you. And then the downward forces, so you might know, for example, that when it's busy season, maybe you work in a business that has a busy season, but you know that that's going to be really hard and you're going to feel a bit more depleted. Well, what must you do extra, or what must you really focus on not just letting go of completely in order to help you maintain yourself and feel resourced? And by that, you know, what I mean is sometimes we can be really inclined to throw out the hour that we go to the gym, or not go for our walk in the morning before we start work because there's so much to do. But actually that's really detrimental. And so work out what your non-negotiables are. So a non-negotiable for you might be that you go to the gym for an hour, or you exercise for an hour 3 times a week. Or it might be something else. It might be that you phone, speak to your family, or you see friends a couple of times a week. But rather than completely obliterating those things, how could you just reduce them so you're still getting something? So maybe it's that you do 15 minutes of yoga at home instead of going to an hour-long yoga class. And again, finding what's right for you there is really important. So the healing power of nature. Green space, really, really good for your well-being. And there are studies shown now that in hospitals, if they have 2 patients and one of the patients has plants in their room, or they can see green stuff out of their window, they heal faster than the patient without green stuff in your room, which I think is pretty amazing. And it only takes 3 minutes for you to drop into your parasympathetic nervous system when you're surrounded by green stuff. And actually, even, you know, in this space today, it would only take you 3 minutes of doing a breathing exercise to drop into your parasympathetic nervous system. So moving your body, so important, releases endorphins. So just getting up out of your seat, you know, they say sitting is the new cancer. Like, we really have to make an effort to get up and not just sit at our screens for 2-3 hours at length. And I'm guilty of that too, you know, so we have to find ways of moving around that. The focusing on your senses I've already talked about, and it doesn't need to be in a formal exercise, but you can just sort of take in the things around you, the sights, smells, sounds, tastes. And of course, you can do formal practice if you want, even if that's just putting your hands on your stomach and following your inhale and exhale for a few minutes. It doesn't have to be sitting in meditation for 40 minutes. And if you want to start doing something like meditation and you've not started, then just start small. Like, start with 5 minutes and build up. Because if you start with something really big, then you're more likely to find that challenging and then give up completely. So better to start small. How am I doing for time? I think I've got about 2 minutes left. So when we think about resilience, we have these different zones of challenge. The growth edge being a really good place to be. We're stretched out of our comfort zone and we're growing, quite literally. The over the edge, it's not that it's a bad place to be, because again, if you think about the analogy of a gym, if you've not been to the gym for a while, you don't go in and pick up the 20 kilo weights or sprint for 20 minutes on the treadmill. You start with a lower weight and you might start with intervals on the treadmill. And then after that, you have a day off, perhaps, to recuperate and rest. And it's the same thing with this over the edge zone. And how we build our resilience is going into the over the edge zone, but then coming out. But if we stay in it for too long, or if the challenge is too big, that's when we end up in the burnout zone. So always be aware that you do need to come out of these periods of extreme, like, overload or working at full tilt, and we have to create rest and recuperation times in order that you can do that and you can move forward without feeling burnt out. So summary, being kind to yourself sounds really basic, but it is so important. It is okay to be worried about going back to the office and just acknowledging that it's going to be awkward. Everybody's gotten a little bit out of the habit of being with other people and being with humans. Self-talk. What do you say to yourself? And is it helpful? Is it going to take you on a bus that's going to a good destination? Or is it going to take you to a bus that you don't really want to go there? Thoughts are not facts. So if you have a thought that's going to take you again to a bad feeling place, then what would be a different thought that you can replace it with? And that doesn't have to be an extreme thought of, like, my life is amazing and everything's good, because let's face it, it's not always amazing, but maybe replace it with a bridging thought. Like, I know that things are challenging at the moment, but things are getting better every day. And I know that I can find help from these resources or people. And with resilience, what can you do to think about those upward or supportive forces? And how can you do small things every day? So small things for your resilience and small things that just bring you joy, because it's about all the little things that we do in our lives, not about going away for a 2-week retreat in Bali, which would be nice, but it's about being in the here and now and being able to deal with that. So I'd like you to think about 3 things that have maybe stood out in your mind today as I've been talking. And from those three things, I'd like you to take only one action of something that you're going to do with it. So one of the big things that I do as a coach is I help people to keep accountable with moving towards the direction that they're going in. That's not to say, you know, everything's completely optional, but it sometimes helps to have somebody to be accountable to. And how will you hold yourself accountable today? Are you a list person? Maybe you're not. Will you tell a friend? Will you tell your flatmate, a colleague? How will you hold yourself accountable to taking that one action forward? And that's it. And I think I'm just over. So thank you all for listening. Oh, I've got a bit of echo there. Yeah, thank you all for listening. And yeah, so please let me know if you've got any questions, and Casey's going to field them for me, I think.
Yes, Nikki, thank you. That was brilliant. Thank you for taking the time to go through the tools needed to control your thoughts, build resilience, and feel confident in tackling everyday stress and anxiety. What really resonated with me was the importance of just being aware and rewiring your brain through habits, building a positive mindset, through creating a support system, or noticing triggers, as you said, or even setting your own expectations by praising your successes, and in some cases, forgiving your past mistakes. I think it's really important, as you said, to be kind to yourself in everyday life. Now, yes, let's go to the question. So I've got a question here. Any tips for stress and anxiety over the current global situation?
Yeah, well, I don't know at what point in the call that question came in, but one of my tips is about the news and being really conscious about the news that you consume. And I'm not telling you not to watch the news, because we're all human, and what's going on is really, really awful, and you know, it makes me feel really emotional. But if you watch the news cycle 24 hours a day, it's like you're in a constant state of anxiety, and you're really you're paralyzed. Something I also talk to people about is I'm looking around because sometimes I have some props on my table, but I don't seem to have them. Is if you think about two circles, and one of them is can't control and the other one is control. If we focus all our energy on the can't control circle, then it is so draining and it can become overwhelming really quickly. But if we think about the control circle, what can we control? You know, maybe that is donating. I was able to volunteer a little bit the last couple of days at a local donation centre, and maybe that's donating money, maybe it's sharing links on social media, whatever that is. But that's going to be far more helpful than our worry, because our worry, you know, it's not going to help anybody. And that's not, again, I'm not diminishing anybody's worry, because it is all worrying. But if you can kind of step into that lighter sense of doing something for the greater good, then that's going to feel better, and that creates a ripple effect for everybody else.
Yeah, definitely. I've got a question here for you. How well can you be mindful and still do two things at once?
Well, there's actually quite a lot of, I think, neuroscience on the fact that multitasking doesn't work. And this is quite interesting, because when I started out my career, that would be one of the things, my things that I told people was like, oh, I'm great at multitasking. But your brain actually, it can't go flip from one task to another, and you can't be fully present. You know, so imagine I'd been presenting today and I was like on my phone checking my messages, and you know, like that. It doesn't work. And the other thing with doing two things at once is that the energy that it takes you to flip between tasks, it actually takes your brain about 20 minutes to regain focus doing the other thing again. So it's really not an efficient use of our time to do two things at once.
Have a great question here. Have a great question here, Nikki, from Nikki, which was, how do you basically balance being a full-time worker and mother and father at the same time? She never feels that I have a break at all, really. So that would be quite an interesting one to answer.
Yeah, and I think that I'm not going to have the answer for you personally. I think something that's really important here is creating time for yourself. The clients that I work with who have families, and I don't personally have my own family, but I coach people that do, and you can get into this mode of doing things all the time for other people and feel like you're constantly on the go and constantly have to doing things. And sometimes there's an element of it's selfish to actually take the time for me because I have all these other things to do, but it's not selfish. You have to resource yourself first, because it's that whole thing of you can't pour from an empty cup. And maybe there's something, and I don't know, Nikki, maybe there's something that you could think about and work in terms of boundaries, and when you are looking at emails, and again, I don't know your personal situation, so this may or may not be relevant, but being really strict in boundaries and how our work seeps into our home time might be something that helped. Brene Brown's work, I don't know if anyone's familiar with that, but if you Google her, she talks about compassion, vulnerability, shame, but some of the research that she has done showed something really surprising, which is that the most compassionate people, so she interviewed people like monks and people who are really, really giving, they were actually the people with the most well-established boundaries. So they knew when to say yes, but they also know when to say no to people. So, I hope that's helpful in some way, but yeah, it really is going to depend on your situation.
Thanks, Nikki. I've got a question here from Farah. So, any tips on keeping my thoughts to myself? I always say how I feel. I don't mean it in a negative way. I've always had this issue and affects relationships with colleagues. Do you have any tips for Farah, Nikki?
Yeah, well, I don't think not keeping your thoughts to yourself is in and of itself a bad thing. I think there is a way of learning or thinking about putting yourself in the other person's shoes and how something might be taken by them, because it's fine to tell people what you think, but there is a phrase of like, is it kind, is it necessary, is it useful, and particularly, and I don't know, Farah, if you're talking about feedback, but particularly giving unsolicited feedback doesn't ever land well. So if you're giving feedback, it's good to try and wait for an invitation to give some feedback on something. But otherwise, I just encourage you to think about how the other person is going to receive that, how you would receive it if it was you. And also remembering that at work, you have lots of different personalities, and something that you might not take badly, it might not land as well with somebody else. So being conscious about who those people are and maybe their traits and their working styles might be helpful as well.
Another great question here from Liv. So, do you have any advice for basically talking nicely to yourself and thinking positively, and how would this work into your routine on a day-to-day basis?
Yeah, so I guess with thinking about making changes, start small. Because if you start by trying to do everything at once, then it doesn't work. So one thing that you can do, there's loads of different things, is not even talking, this isn't even about talking to yourself, but when somebody gives you a compliment, like Casey, if you said to me, "Oh, Nikki, I really like your jumper," if I went, "Oh yeah, this old thing, like it was like a £5 in a car boot sale down the road." So when we do that, we're kind of dismissive of the other person, and also we're not absorbing it. So we're telling our brain that it's not, like, that's not acceptable. I realize that's not the question that you asked though. And so sometimes it's just, telling yourself that you've done a good job. The best praise that we can get, and a lot of the time, particularly in corporate situations, we can seek recognition from other people and want to be told that we're doing a good job. But actually the best praise that you can give or get is from yourself, because you're not relying on external factors. So you can ask yourself questions like, what's good about this? Because when we do that, it teaches our brain to sort of hunt the good stuff, which is what they call it in positive psychology, because we have a negativity bias, which means that all of us do this in varying different degrees, but our brain automatically scans for anything that might be dangerous or threatening to us. We have these things called amygdala, and they're like constantly on high alert. And if they see anything that's remotely like something that's happened in the past, they trigger our stress response system. But when we can think instead of like, okay, what's good about this? Or that's the worst case situation, how else might this go? Because for every worst case scenario, there's also a most likely and there's a best case scenario. And also there's lots of other different ways in between, because we never know how things are going to go. So if we're aware of the thought that's maybe not one that is as positive as we might like, we can just stop and say, okay, what are the other possibilities here? How else might this go? If anything was possible, how might this go? And that can just start to open up our brain to think about the different kind of outcomes.
Absolutely, Nikki. We've got a joint question here from Emily and Claire. So are there any podcasts you could recommend, or even further readings, further books, YouTube videos at all? Basically just about what you discussed today.
I have loads. I have loads. So one of them, somebody mentioned about failure. The Elizabeth Day How to Fail podcast is really good. And I don't listen to that all the time, but she's got lots of different stories about different people that it's basically talking about how our failures is how we succeed. And this is a very, it's a growth mindset approach to thinking about things, which is, if something goes wrong, it doesn't stop us in our tracks. We think, okay, well, that was disappointing, but how can I learn from that and go forward? And with that in mind, you could look up Carol Dweck, D-W-E-C-K. She talks about mindset. If you type in positive psychology, Martin Seligman, you'll get lots of stuff about positive psychology. Mindfulness, there's a book by, I've forgotten the name, I think it's Mindfulness for Everyday Life, and it's by Mark Williams and Danny Penman. And it's a really, really practical step-by-step book that talks about actually mindfulness-based cognitive therapy. So that's really great. I mentioned Brene Brown, so B-R-E-N-E Brown, B-R-O-W-N. And actually in relation to the sort of the mum themes, she has a book called The Gifts of Imperfection, which is, it's also really good. I mean, there's so many. I could probably just sit here and tell you about all of the things to read and listen to. There are lots, so I hope that helps.
Well, I would really, really like to give a massive shout out to Nikki for hosting such an open and insightful session today. I can't thank you enough. All the questions were fantastic, and those we unfortunately couldn't answer at the end will be noted, and those answers, as well as a recording and further materials, they'll be circulated to you over the next couple of days. Now, if you'd like to book a session with Nikki or one of our amazing practitioners, please go to mindup.com/booking. If you're new to booking a session or would like further information or advice, please contact our experienced team at hello@mindup.com. I put both those links in the chat box, so please feel free to reach out. We'll be more than happy to help. Now, everyone, thank you for all attending today, and have a fantastic rest of your day, everyone, and we'll see you soon.
Thanks, everyone. Have a great day.